If you ask a lot of Republican leaders about Donald Trump being indicted for trying to overturn the results of an election while he was in office, they will probably redirect the conversation to President Biden's son, Hunter Biden, who doesn't work in our government. We have seen it for months. And now this third Trump indictment has started a new wave of whataboutism from the GOP. For instance, here's what House GOP conference chair Elise Stefanik had to say after the indictment. Quote, "Today's sham indictment of Donald Trump is yet another desperate attempt to distract attention away from the mounting evidence of Joe Biden's direct involvement in his family's illegal influence peddling scheme, one of the greatest political corruption scandals in history." Okay, I want to be crystal clear. There is absolutely no equivalency here. And if we do not clarify that, we will cede the narrative to those who are lying about it. So we're going to set the record straight. Back with me tonight, Peter Baker, chief White House correspondent for The New York Times, and Philip Bump, Washington Post national columnist. Peter, Elise Stefanik says, quote, "There's mounting evidence that Joe Biden was directly involved in an illegal peddling scheme." Can you fact check that for us? Is there any evidence of that?
No, there isn't. Not anything that would be convincing. There's some wisps here or there that people are trying to pursue, but the truth is, at this point, there's nothing like that. What we see in front of us, can be a scandal and can be something that should be scrutinized and and it is in fact being investigated. Whether or not Hunter Biden traded on his family name, it's an important issue. But there's no evidence, even if he did, and we don't know they're still unsettled in terms of any kind of court of law. But even if he did, there's no evidence that the vice president, that is his father, when he was vice president, used his power of his office to do anything to benefit his son's business clients or anything like that. Now, what we don't have a complete and full picture of is exactly what involvement, if any, his father had with his business dealings. The vice president, now president, said he never spoke with his son about his business dealings. There's been some testimony that his son, put his dad on the phone to kind of impress business clients, even if he didn't actually talk about business. Obviously, that's something that people would want to know about. That's a reasonable thing to look at and make a judgment about. But it doesn't come anywhere close to the things we're talking about when we're talking about President Trump. They're really an apples and oranges comparison here. President Trump has been accused of falsifying business records in New York in order to cover up hush money to a porn star. He's been accused of jeopardizing national security with classified documents and obstructing justice in Florida. And he's now been accused of trying to overturn an election, which no sitting president has ever tried to do. None of those things come anywhere close to what we're talking about with Hunter Biden. But it's a useful political argument for the Republicans to try to change the subject, to shift attention, and to make out the idea that somehow there's a two-tier justice system that's somehow victimizing former President Trump.
Republicans are making a lot of claims based on what a man named Devon Archer, a former associate of Hunter Biden, said in a closed-door hearing on the Hill. But, Philip, we had a chance to see the transcript, and we learned a lot. And walk us through this, because based on what we've read, none of what Republicans are claiming is true.
Yeah, I mean, Peter's summary there was excellent. I mean, he articulated the distinction between what Joe Biden's being accused of and what is actually present in the record. So Devon Archer went to the Hill and in this closed-door session was grilled by investigators from Congress. And he made another claim. So, like, he revealed this issue about having, Joe Biden being put on speakerphone when Hunter Biden was in business meetings and stuff. The challenge that we have is immediately after that hearing, two prominent congressional Republicans, Jim Jordan from Ohio and James Comer from Kentucky, went on Sean Hannity's Fox News program and immediately made up false claims about what Devon Archer said, exaggerated what he said, which has been a pattern with James Comer. James Comer is the guy who introduced this whole bribery thing for which there's been no evidence that's accrued over the past 2 months. But they claimed that Devon Archer had essentially given the game away, that he had gotten Joe Biden dead to rights on this stuff. Those aren't the exact words, but this was the implication of that. Then we get Devon Archer's actual testimony. What we see is, yes, he says this thing about the phone, but he also says, I had no knowledge of Joe Biden ever being involved in this. I saw Hunter Biden explicitly saying, hey, look, my dad's not involved in this, but we need to sort of fool people into thinking he is because that's where our clout comes from. And for these people to say, oh, this phone conversation thing is proof that Joe Biden was involved, but then to ignore when Devon Archer is saying, actually, I didn't see him involved at all, is just thoroughly dishonest, and that's been the pattern we keep seeing.
What do we do with that, Peter? Right, they're going on national news and absolutely lying when what the transcript basically said was it's a couple of cheesy business guys trying to bait and switch, and the former vice president, now president, didn't have anything to do with that. But you've got millions of people watching Fox News in GOP circles who are out there going, well, Trump's a criminal, Biden's a criminal. And none of the facts are bearing out, at least not at this point.
Yeah, that's exactly what Republicans would like to do with this, by saying, look, it's all, everybody does the same thing. Everybody's, the water is muddy here, and so don't really pay much attention to this. Obviously, these are not the same issues. That shouldn't let Hunter Biden off the hook if he has been, involved in a wrongdoing. Investigators are looking at that. So far, the only thing he's actually been charged with were 2 misdemeanor tax charges, which he's going to plead guilty to once they iron out some legal disputes over the plea agreement, and a gun charge, which is going to be dismissed if he goes through a diversion program. But we don't know if there's going to be anything else. Again, that's still an apples and oranges situation here, but it's a useful political tool for Republicans because they can say, well, Donald Trump is being, persecuted for his crimes, and somehow Hunter Biden isn't. And, the differences are remarkable. Remember, Hunter Biden is being investigated by a Trump-appointed U.S. attorney. David Weiss was appointed by Donald Trump, and Joe Biden's administration, the Justice Department, allowed him to keep in that job when they came in, rather than look like they were trying to give favoritism to the president's son. And David Weiss is saying, no, he has not been interfered with, even though there is some grumbling among some of the investigators who feel like he was. So, that's a very different situation that we're talking about with Donald Trump, where you've had 3 different prosecutions on 3 different rather serious and remarkably serious charges here. And remember, of course, as you said at the top, Hunter Biden was not, and will not be the president of the United States, whereas Donald Trump was and wants to be again.
He does not have security clearance, not even close. He is the president's son. Philip, I want you to fact check something else for us, because today I had several GOP sources quick to send me New York Post articles, New York Post reporting, right-wing media people like Tucker Carlson trying to make a big deal out of a letter that Joe Biden wrote to an associate of Hunter's.
Right.
Can you give us the truth about this famed letter?
Right. So this letter apparently came in 2011, and it immediately followed. Immediately followed. President Obama had welcomed the Chinese premier to the White House, and Joe Biden had some sort of engagement with him. And apparently, the Devon Archer and Hunter Biden, who were, I guess, acquaintances at that point. I'm not sure if they were even in business at that point in time. They had encountered Joe Biden, and Joe Biden had not said hello to Devon Archer, so he sent this subsequent letter to Devon Archer saying, "Hey, sorry I didn't get a chance to say hi to you. I was tied up with the Chinese premier," right? To sort of obviously tongue in cheek. That's it, right? But it's on the front page of the New York Post. This is one of the fascinating things about this to me, is the existence of anything that mentions Devon Archer is immediately seized upon as evidence of some sort of wrongdoing on the part of the Bidens. It's this letter. And if you read the letter, you see there's nothing about business. It's obviously to someone who his son is acquainted with. It mentions nothing about business. It happens to mention China. Exactly. But, in this Tucker Carlson interviews Devon Archer, there's nothing of substance to it. It's the same thing we keep here. But people just elevate it and say, oh, look, this exists, and therefore it's evidence to my point. And it's just like, well, just read it or watch the interview and see. But people just don't do that. And that's part of why this gets traction as well.
But it's also why your reporting, Philip, your reporting, Peter, are so crucially important, because the truth matters, but only if you hear it.